Today we'll be discussing the article, The Pricing the Priceless, Cost-Benefit Analysis of Environmental Protection by Lisa Heiserling and Frank Ackerman. So a cost-benefit analysis, or a CBA, and so you may hear me during this video reference CBA or cost-benefit analysis when I am referencing the same document when I say CBA or cost-benefit analysis. A CBA is a document that adds up the benefits of public policy. So it adds up those benefits to the public, and then what it does is it compares it with the cost of implementation of that policy. So for example, if we want to put a new law into effect where we lower the standards, and in the document it talks about arsenic. So for example, right now the arsenic limit by the EPA is set at 10 parts per billion. If, for example, the DEP, which is at the state level, wanted to implement a new law that wanted to make the standards lower, for example, implement 2 parts per billion, and they propose this regulation to the public and say, okay, so now we want drinking water standards to be 2 parts per billion, they would need to supplement that proposal of that regulation with a cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis collects all of this data and then shows the public what the benefits to the public would be and versus the cost to the companies that it would be to implement that. So for example, with arsenic in the drinking water, it would actually be how much would it cost residents in the state of, let's say, New Jersey or Pennsylvania, how much will they have to pay on their bill each month to be able to lower the arsenic level. And this is where a lot of people get a little worried in this document is technically we have to look for a middle ground there where the benefits to the public versus how much it costs are sort of equal. If the cost to implement the new technologies and it's only saving like 2 lives, the benefits to the public, that regulation most likely will not be counted. Now you might say, well, what happens if it's my child who dies because they have arsenic in the drinking water? Unfortunately, it is, when it comes to cost-benefit analysis and implementation of regulation and new policies, it is the utilitarian point of view, which is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So any new proposal for new legislation must go through a cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefits and the cost-benefit analysis, the results of the cost-benefit analysis really do determine whether it is worth going through with putting this new regulation into effect. Now, the cost-benefit analysis looks at the, what is the monetized benefits. So what are the monetized benefits, which is, what we were kind of talking about. So what are the monetized benefits to putting this into law, into this new regulation into a law? It looks at those monetized benefits, and I'm sorry, I'm like flipping through, versus those estimated costs. Now, how do we get those monetized benefits? Meaning, how do we know how much it is to save a person's life or an animal's life or any living thing's life? And this is where people get a little, they get a little sticky. And the reason for that is because we have to put a price tag on life. And a lot of people will say, oh, you can't put a price tag on life. Well, unfortunately, in cost-benefit analysis, every human and every animal that's affected by implementing this new regulation has a price tag. Those price tags are determined actually through surveys. Yes, through surveys. So this is where Heiserling and Ackerman bring up one of the flaws to cost-benefit analysis, which is the fact that these monetized benefits, how much it is worth to save someone's life, or how much it's worth to avoid bladder cancer, or how much it's worth to avoid lung cancer, are determined through surveys. And with that, there's a lot of problems. And one of the things is that in the surveys ask you how much you're willing to pay, and then how much you actually will pay. And so they're 2 different things. So for example, how much are you willing to pay? And Heiserling and Ackerman use the bald eagle. How much are you willing to pay to save the bald eagle? Well, what I'm willing to pay is, I might say $100 on the survey. But then when someone actually comes to my door and says to me, oh, you actually have to pay up, now all of a sudden, oh, well, I only have $20 in my wallet. So there's two different aspects there, what's your willingness to pay and then what you're actually going to pay, two different things. The other thing is it depends upon the species, and I know. So for example, a lot of we find in these surveys that a lot of the fuzzier creatures and the cuter creatures, actually people are more willing and actually pay more to save them than other creatures and other species. And even though those other species may actually be more integral to the ecological system, people aren't willing to pay as much. For example, we find other things. A lot of military members are willing to pay more to save the bald eagle than other people because the bald eagle is a representation of freedom, or it means more to people in the military because that is their symbol. In a lot of, like for example, in the Marines, the symbol is an eagle. So there's a lot of biased results with monetizing the benefits. Okay, so you want to make sure you take a look, and that's on page 5 of the document. So you want to make sure you look at that of the cost-benefit analysis. And so what happens is Heiserling and Ackerman take you through a series of what are the flaws, what are the positives, what are the negatives to a cost-benefit analysis. They actually spend more time on the flaws than they do on the benefits of cost-benefit analysis. And then they take you through alternatives as well. So they give you some alternatives to the cost-benefit analysis through the cost-benefit analysis process. The one thing I want you to take a look at, and this is, now I know this document is really long and you don't need to, there is an actual case study in here, so you don't technically have to read the case study, but it may help you understand the material a little bit in further detail. I'm going to actually take you to page 18 because I want you to take a look at something, because I want to show you how this actually works. And this is actually in the cost-benefit analysis document that shows you like the practice, in practice, arsenic in the drinking water. And it's on page 18. So here we go. So right here, this is the cost and benefits and of different arsenic standards, and you can say here's the arsenic standard, 3 parts per billion, 5 if we implemented 5 parts per billion, if we implemented 10 parts per billion, or if we implemented the law that 10 parts per billion. The cost to comply with these numbers, so the cost to comply for water treatment facilities would be $700 to $790 million if we want to get the arsenic drinking level to 3 parts per billion. It's 420 to 470 million if we want to get the arsenic level to 5 parts per billion. Do you see how 180 to 210 million to implement new technologies that will get the arsenic level to 10, and 67 million to 77 million to get it to 20 parts per billion. The benefits, the health benefits are 210 to 490 million dollars, etc., etc. And these are the cases of bladder and lung cancers that are avoided with this new arsenic level standard. So I want you to take a look at this. If we get the arsenic level to 3 parts per billion, it's going to cost $700 to $790 million to implement it. The health benefits are going to be $210 to $490 million, and we're going to save approximately 57 to 140 cases of bladder or lung cancer. Okay? The actual implementation is actually 10 parts per billion. So because of this case study, everyone agreed to 10 parts per billion. And you might say, oh, but look, we're saving more lung and bladder cancer cases here, but if we took it to 3 parts per billion, the problem is that the cost of compliance is $700 to $790 million. And facilities are not going to pay that, because the truth of the matter is that actually is going to be incurred by the public, because it's going to raise your water bills. And the benefits are 210 to 490 million. But we are saving a lot of lives, but the cost is really expensive. So the public, along with the federal government, agreed upon this standard here, which is we're going to put in the law that arsenic levels have to be either 10 parts per billion or lower, depending upon your state. If your state wants to implement stronger standards, they can do that. But we're going to set the standard at 10 parts per billion, because at 10 parts per billion, it'll only cost $180 to $210 million to implement. The health benefits are pretty comparable to the cost, so we can say that. Well, the health benefits equal the cost, so they're pretty comparable there. It's not like the costs are super high and the health benefits are low. The health benefits sort of equal the cost, and we are saving 37 to 56 lives, or avoiding 36 to 57 cancer cases. And so this is kind of how cost-benefit analysis work, is you look for that middle ground. And now, for example, if we could get this number closer together, that would be a more viable solution, but it's not. Okay, so I want you to take a look at this document and read it through. You'll see that Heiserling and Ackerman take you through both the pros and cons. Take a look at that discounting the future too, because it's a really interesting scenario. That they explain is one of the negatives to cost-benefit analysis. And so you want to take a look at what discounting the future means. You want to look at what the pros and cons to cost-benefit analysis are. You want to look at what the alternatives to cost-benefit analysis are. Unfortunately, I think cost-benefit analysis are here to stay, and the reason is because it makes all of this information transparent and objective to the public, and the public likes transparency and objectivity-ness. So, you got to remember that a lot of this documentation and a lot of this material is very intricate, and it's very hard for the public to understand. But by making it readable and in this document type format, it allows the public to be part of the conversation and ask questions, and the government actually has to respond to every single question that the public asks in a cost-benefit analysis. Remember to take your quiz at the end of this section.